All right.
Just go ahead and state your name, major, and how long you've been in the program.
All right. My name is Munfarid. My major is biology, and I've been in the program for 2 semesters.
So why did you sign up for the program?
Initially, I signed up for the program because I felt like going through the program would prepare me pretty well for the MCAT that was coming up. I knew that taking the class and then also being in LA for the class would kind of cement the information in your head, right? But once I actually got into it, I realized there's so much more behind the program than just that. I think if you enjoy chemistry and you enjoy helping students with the learning process, then this is the perfect program for you. If that's something you enjoy, then you'll enjoy every day that you're in here. I remember spending more time preparing for class than for my actual classes sometimes, just because I enjoyed doing this and the other classes were not as much fun as this was.
So what have you learned being in the program?
I've learned that there's a very big difference between understanding chemistry enough to be able to answer a question, just write it down on a piece of paper, versus understanding it enough to be able to talk to a student and explain how to get the answer, right? For understanding it just for yourself, all you have to do is to be able to get it enough to be able to write it down. But if you have to stand in front of a student and explain why that's happening, why that's the correct answer, and if they don't have the correct answer, then knowing how to lead them towards it requires a lot more out of you. And so by going through this program, you get, I think, a much more fine-tuned understanding of how chemistry works.
So what impact has this course had?
Hold on for a second. Yeah, let them quiet. You're fine.
All right.
Hey guys, can we hold down just a little bit?
There's a lady who walked in, was just having a very stressful day.
About 5 dirty eyeballs from everyone we work with staring at me. I don't like that. Oh, well.
Okay, do I need to repeat the last
Oh,
question?
no, you're fine.
So what impact has this course had on your college experience?
I think I've taken what I've learned while being in LA, the approach that I have to both understanding the material and being able to teach other students that material, and applied that to my other classes as well. I don't just try to learn other classes enough to get by. I tell myself now, okay, so you've got this answer down. Now, how would you explain this? How would you kind of synthesize all this information together, connect it with one another so that it'd be coherent and make sense to somebody else? And I think approaching other classes in that way makes you understand the material much better than if you're only kind of tackling the material with the purpose of getting through it.
So what are you planning on doing after you finish college?
After I finish college, I'm well, of course, planning to apply to medical school. Hoping either the UC San Francisco Medical School, Harvard if I can get in, and then of course Baylor College of Medicine and UT Southwestern.
So what are the benefits of this learning style for the students?
I think that often when you have a question during class, if the professor's there, you might feel intimidated to ask the question, and the chemistry professors are these wonderful, distinguished individuals, and it might feel to just a little freshman student that if they ask a question that's not very sophisticated, then the professor might not look as highly upon them. And it's just intimidating to talk to them in general. I feel having these LAs who are effectively your peers walk around and be available for you to ask questions makes it so that students are just encouraged to ask questions more often than they would be if the LA program was not there. I know a lot of students have told me that having the LAs around has encouraged them to ask questions much more often than they would have on their own and kind of facilitated their learning process.
So what was a memorable experience you had with a student you helped?
There was a student who I was talking to who sits all the way up in the back who asked a question, and she asked me the question and started going through her process for how she got to the answer, and went through the entire process very methodically and got to her last answer and looked at me, and within a second saw the look on my face that I had and immediately went through her explanation again, started it from the beginning, and then came to the answer on her own. Somehow she could understand just by looking at me that her question wasn't right, and she could go back, rethink the whole process through her head, and then come to the right answer, which is a fascinating process for her, that just having to explain it to somebody, to have somebody available who you could to speak to about it, and getting their feedback as minimally as she did was enough for her to get to the right answer. And I don't think that would have been possible if she had just sat there, thought through it on her own, and just clicked the answer right away.
How do your communication skills improve throughout being a mentor?
I think initially you are kind of, as an LA, predisposed towards if they tell you the wrong answer, you just immediately tell them, okay, well, that's incorrect. Here's what the right answer is, and explain it to them as if you're a professor. I think going through the LA program has taught me that the right way to kind of speak to a student, to teach a student, is to ask them questions that lead them towards the correct answer. So really, it's taught me to be patient, more patient with students as I'm speaking to them. It's taught me to kind of choose the words I say very carefully in order to, rather than giving the answer to a student, to kind of plant an idea in their head that would push them towards the right direction. So I think it's made my kind of the approach I have to chemistry a little bit more nuanced and thoughtful than before.
What do you think you've learned from the experience that you could carry over to your career?
I definitely want to take an element of teaching into medicine as well. I don't just want to practice. I think it'd be a wonderful experience to kind of train new doctors as well once I've gotten the skills needed to be able to offer them something. I think the LA program is a very wonderful way to kind of get this exposure into the teaching world, to kind of see the class rather than from a student's perspective, to look at it from the professor's perspective, how they're trying to teach these students, what they think is the best way to teach them, and then be able to kind of participate in that process a little bit. I think it's a very worthwhile experience if that's something that you're interested in.
Do you have any more memorable experiences or another experience where you made an impact on a student?
There was a student who asked me a question, who sits in the front of the class, who raised her hand and looked at me with this face of just deep confusion and worry. She had her chemistry exam the next day. It was one of the RAQ days. And I can't exactly remember what the topic was about. I believe it was about kind of the molecular and electronic geometry, and she just did not understand how to go about figuring out what exactly was the answer. And I remember starting from the kind of the most basic level and seeing how you figure that out to start with. And at a certain point, she went from having her eyebrows just this creased, troubled look to just like, and she got it. Something clicked in her head. I don't know if it was so much me as much as just giving the student the opportunity to think through it herself. And she just said, thank you so much. She asked me if I had a review session, and I'm an undergraduate at LA. And that was very satisfying to be able to help a student go from worry to just comprehension.
Is there anything else that you would like to further expand upon, or a question that we haven't asked you that you would like to talk about regarding POGL?
I think being in the LA program, got to word this properly. I think being in the LA program requires you to kind of look at your job as this kind of mentor differently. I think a lot of students enter just thinking they're, yes, right. Do you need me to repeat what I said? Yeah. I think being in the LA program kind of makes you re-evaluate how you see the role of a mentor. A lot of LAs, it seems to me, come in thinking they're just going to be this kind of knowledgeable figure above the students, that they're they're inherently above them, they're more intelligent than them, and they're going to tell them the answers because we are so wonderful and we know everything we're doing. And you really realize that there's not that big of a difference between you and the student. You've just been exposed to this before. That's really all you have to your name. And that makes it so that you can relate to them much more easily than would another person who had done this and was a chemistry professor and had done this for just decades at a time. I think there's a unique place that the LAs have because of that, the situation that we're in, because we are their equals, that makes it so that we can perhaps give a different perspective on the learning process than could a professor or a teaching assistant.
Can I get you to say some more of this? Say that again, I guess, but keep in mind that the microphone's right here.
Oh, right, okay.
When you grab, just
Oh, yeah, don't touch it.
Yeah.
This is the basic idea there.
Yeah.
Okay. Start from the beginning?
Yeah.
I can shorten
You
it.
could just flow with it. You're doing good at it. There's a lot of good information in what you said.
Right, okay, gotcha. Now that I've said it, I think I can kind of not make it so wordy, I suppose. I think being in the LA program has made it so that you approach the role of a mentor and the importance of being a mentor differently. There's a particular perspective that an LA can give that a professor or a teaching assistant can't give, because really the only difference between us and the student that we're talking to is that we've seen this material before, we've been exposed to it before. So really the way that we approach these problems, the way that it appears in our head, is not all that different from how it appears in the student's head when they see it the first time. So it seems to me that a professor or a teaching assistant who's been going over this material all the time for years and years at a time won't be able to kind of perhaps see it through the eyes of a student quite as well as an LA would be able to. And the fact that we were able to walk up to these students and talk to them for a little bit of time and walk them through them in the way that we had, I think is a very useful aspect of the LA program. It provides a unique perspective on the learning process that couldn't be provided by a teaching assistant or a professor.